The Epstein scandal was one of the biggest scandals in our lifetime, with many international figures denying involvement and then actually being caught in a lie. Somehow, Epstein was emailing back and forth with many world leaders, scientists, and billionaires. In one email, Epstein arranged for an unidentified recipient to meet many world leaders. In another email, Epstein claimed that he was staying with the head of the Nobel Prize Committee. The New York Times uncovered that the owner of a private army paid Epstein $50 million. And Epstein is also connected to Peter Thiel, who is the owner of a weapons development firm, Palantir. In an email to Peter Thiel, Epstein claimed to have represented the Rothschilds. But how does something like this happen? How does one man form all of these international connections? So I wanted to dive into understanding the psychology of the Epstein files. But before we do that, we first have to understand what is actually in the Epstein files. So the primary allegation against Epstein is that he trafficked women and children to have sex with on his island. This is what Epstein was arrested for in 2019, and this is also what he pled guilty to in 2009, where he pled guilty to soliciting prostitution from a person under the age of 18. There are many references in the emails towards Jeff having a harem, and he often actually referred to himself as a pedophile. In one email, Epstein says, "Your friend Aliza told me about the project she's doing researching a really bad guy that gets children for sex sent to his island. She almost fainted when I told her that person is me." The second, more controversial claim is that many believe that Epstein trafficked these girls for blackmail or for future favors. And this was the narrative that was presented originally, with Pam Bondi claiming that she actually has the actual file of the people that he trafficked the girls to on his desk. But then later she says that the file mysteriously actually never existed. And the FBI also says that there is no evidence that any of the girls were trafficked to anybody else. And this is in opposition to one of Epstein's supposed victims, Virginia Giuffre, who says that she was trafficked to many scientists particularly, but also world leaders, and that she believes that he was doing that because he was getting either blackmail on them or that he was getting future payment from them. Virginia also has a picture of her with Prince Andrew, and she says that she came from a rural family who's the lower class in America. And so it's very unlikely that she would be able to meet the prince, a royal prince, at a house party. This kind of bolsters her claim. And other evidence is that an FBI informant claimed that they believed that Epstein was trafficking women for blackmail. In an email, Richard Branson, who's the CEO of Virgin Mobile, says that Epstein is welcome back as long as he brings his harem. And there's also many emails of Epstein trying to set up other older men with younger girls. And so where did he get so many of these girls? He got them through at least three sources. The first is Ghislaine Maxwell. And she would approach women and she would ask them if they were interested in getting paid to massage Epstein. And then they would actually turn the tables and then offer them payment for sex. And Maxwell recruited Virginia and many other girls by walking around Mar-a-Lago, seeing attractive women, and then offering them to be a masseuse for Epstein. And then later they would actually offer them payment for sex once the girls had arrived inside. I'll get into that a little bit more in a little bit. The other source was his helper, so other girls recruited other girls. So for example, one of the girls said that she got paid $200 for every girl that she brought in, and she said that she brought in about 50 girls. Another witness, Virginia, so that's the second witness now, also claims that she did the same thing. And another source is Brunel, and Brunel is a French model scout. In Virginia's memoir, she recounts that Epstein told her that he had sex with over 1,000 girls that Brunel brought to him. And so one of the major questions is that now that Epstein has been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years, how is he able to get away with this for so long? And so how was he able to get so many girls to do this? I think we can better understand this question when we look at Virginia's own life trajectory before she met Epstein. So Virginia recounts in her memoir that she was first abused by her dad as young as 5 years old. To get away from her dad, she ran away out onto the street. There, she was abused by another man. She's a homeless young woman, so that kind of tracks. It's a very dangerous environment for a woman to be in. And so to escape being abused on the street, she ended up in a relationship with another older man who was a model scout, not Brunel, a different model scout. She was his girlfriend, but he later ended up trafficking her to other men as well. And so think about this. By the time that she met Epstein, she's already been for free, right? So now Epstein offers her a lot of money, and Virginia doesn't have any. She dropped out of high school. She has a drug problem. She doesn't have family. She doesn't have anywhere that she's going in life. And so Epstein kind of offers her a way out. And again, she's already been doing this for free. And so now she's going to get 1 week's worth of wages for each time that she has with him. And this is consistent with a social psychologist, Katz, who says that we form opinions on things for 4 reasons. And one of the reasons is that the attitude object, so the thing that we're forming the opinion on, is instrumental to us. It benefits or it harms us. So when Virginia and Ghislaine Maxwell were sent out to recruit girls, they were explicitly told to recruit girls who would exchange for money. So one quote from her memoir reads, "But his key requirement, other than looks, was vulnerability. Recruits had to be enough on the edge, as Epstein and Maxwell put it, that they would submit to in exchange for money." But unlike the other recruits, she said that I warned each potential recruit that they'd have to naked during the massage, and that the rich man they'd be servicing could sometimes expect more intimate physical contact. She also targeted girls who were hungry and poor, and she brought some of her friends to Epstein use. So, and then once those girls would arrive for a massage, and they would be asked to have sex, then after sex, they would be paid, and then after they came a few times, they could be promoted to sort of a full-time prostitution position. And in this luxurious position, they would basically be able to travel with Epstein all over the world and stay in luxurious hotels. So that's, for example, one instrumental benefit. The second is that Virginia said that Epstein actually told her that he promised girls one of three things. He can pay them large sums of money, he can kickstart their careers, or he can marry them off to a wealthy man. For Virginia, he promised her a career as a masseuse. And later on, when she sort of pressed him on it, he actually delivered and sent her to one of the best schools in the world in Thailand. And she stayed in a luxurious hotel that whole time. So Epstein didn't sort of chimp out or try to back out of the deal. He actually delivered. Also, she said that he married off one of his girls to a very wealthy man. And also, she recognized one girl from the island who actually ended up having a role as an actress. And in the script that Virginia used to recruit girls, she used the words that he can make your dreams come true. And there's also videos of Epstein seemingly celebrating with other young women, possibly because they got a publication. One part of Epstein was that it was very transactional. It was very, clear-cut. People knew what they were getting on after they've already been recruited. So during the recruitment process, he used a little bit of deception to get people to come in. He didn't just straight up tell them, hey, you're going to be a full-time prostitute. He took it incrementally, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit. But once they were at that point, then they struck a deal, and it didn't seem like Epstein would budge out of that deal. He wouldn't try to use blackmail or get out of it. And so for many girls, they actually did this from a practical economic standpoint. But I think something that is even more important to that is that Epstein actually chose very particular women that he preyed on, and he preyed on girls who were already vulnerable and willing to make this sort of deal. So he didn't meet girls at church or girls out of school and then try to convince them. He already looked for people who had a certain psychological makeup. And the major point here is that he met these victims' underlying psychological needs. So when the victims have a very unmet psychological need, so the three needs that I outlined are people have a need for self-esteem, people have a need for belonging, and people also have a need to have meaning in their life. These are all psychological needs. And so when somebody has a troubled past, it's a lot easier for Epstein to sort of meet these needs. If he met a billionaire, woman who has everybody fawning over her, it would be very much more difficult for him to convince her to do this sort of stuff. But it's a lot easier when somebody has nothing going for them. And even just a little bit, they're very desperate. Take, for example, Virginia, right? She doesn't have family. She was abused by her family. She dropped out of school. She doesn't have a career path. She doesn't have any friends. So she has all of these sort of needs. So a need to belong. She has a need to maintain her self-esteem. So to see her as somebody who's capable and a good person or somebody who's useful and worthwhile. And then also a need for meaning in her life. A need for a direction to propel her life to go forward. Where she doesn't have any sort of career plans. She said loosely she wants to be a veterinarian, but that's actually kind of it's very difficult. Where you have to first complete high school, then go to college, and then get into veterinary school. At least where I'm from. So that seemed a little bit like a far off dream for her. And yeah, so like I said, having all of these unmet psychological needs, it makes it easier to satisfy her, and then she ends up being dependent on you. So in terms of need for belonging, what I have here is that Epstein often asked her to call him daddy. Ghislaine asked her to call her mom. And Ghislaine would also often introduce Virginia to others as her daughter. And so they sort of had this family dynamic. They also went on vacations together. They went snorkeling together. She also said that Epstein at one point, taught her to drive. They taught her they did very family stuff together. And at one point, Virginia said that she actually saw her as her mom. And remember, we know that Virginia didn't really have a close family tie. Maybe that's something that she was psychologically craving. And besides that, she also remarks that she had a lot of time to socialize. So she, for example, she didn't work full time, right? She only like did it a few times during the day. And so the rest of that time she would have free time. And so she would talk to girls on the island. She said that she made friends with some of the cooks who were there. And so now she has a community. And remember that before Epstein, she doesn't have any friends, right? She dropped out of high school. She doesn't have a ongoing career path. She doesn't have family, so she's very lonely, right? In regards for a need for self-esteem, remember that Virginia traveled all over the world. She went snorkeling, she went to Asia, she went to Europe. And so, she's kind of staying in a very high-end hotel, 4 or 5-star hotels, right? She said she sleeps in Egyptian cots, and I don't even know what that is. I guess I'm kind of a loser, maybe, I don't know, for that. So, and remember, she's also like talking to maybe some people back home, right, once in a while. So she said that she was talking to some of her brothers, and she tells them, hey, she's sending them, she kept buying cameras, and she kept taking photographs. Like, look at your older sister. Look where I'm traveling the world. Everything's so awesome. And she kind of feels like she's on top of the world. Everybody sort of looks up to her. And this is very different again, like when I talked about where she was, a loser, dropout, whatever. It fulfills her need for self-esteem. In one line, she says, I'd met all these people because I was in Epstein's orbit. Can you forgive me for wanting to feel that some of their power and importance might rub off on me? And so again, remember, Epstein's connected to all these billionaire scientists, Nobel Prize winners, Nobel Prize selectors. He's connected to Chomsky. He's connected to people who run military operations, right? Blackwater. They own army groups. So he's really like when she meets royalty, and royalty again desires her, right? Sexually though, but she feels like a very high self-esteem. She feels like very validated, like she's a very important person. And keep in mind that she's still an adolescent, right? She's 16 years old. So this is when identity is rapidly forming. People don't have a standard on who they are yet, necessarily. They don't know if I'm really great or I'm really bad. People are still kind of determining their space in the social hierarchy. We kind of see like monkeys, where monkeys often, grapple with each other, and then they have a set order. Same with wolves, right? Any social animal. And so here, during adolescence, people sort of grapple a little bit, and they're determining their space in the hierarchy. And this more or less kind of stays with people over their life. And so for her, she's very young. She doesn't know where she fits in. And now through what Epstein's providing her, she's really high up on this social hierarchy. She's hanging out with all these billionaire founders. For I think somebody a little bit older, it sounds like, okay, obviously they're using you. But for her at that time, I think it seems like it's plausible that she actually is, an important person, that she's actually valued, even though, for example, nobody ever valued her. Her family, she had, trysts with boys who also, kind of just used her. She didn't really have anybody who really respected her, who she also respected back, I suppose. In regards for a need for meaning, and so, that's really important. So we outlined the need for belonging, need for self-esteem. One more need that I want to outline here. There could be many more, but one important one is a need for meaning. And a need for meaning, remember that here she has a structure, she has a job, and she has responsibilities. So she has a job to do, right? But before, she was kind of free-floating through life. She didn't know. She said she wanted to be a veterinarian maybe, but she doesn't have any concrete plan to accomplish that. Over here, she has a very particular job structure, and she has responsibilities. And so she has a purpose. She has something to do, right? So her meaning is to, I guess, kind of satisfy other people. And that kind of, it's kind of, even though it sounds a little bit degrading, I think for her at that time, it felt nice for her that she had something seemingly meaningful to do, because they were also very well off, right? And she endorsed some of those ideas that she was a woman, and maybe Epstein a little bit got to her where he said that a woman's job is to please a man. And so she said, well, I'm doing my job. So now she has a purpose, she has meaning. Besides that, she also was given money, right? And now she is also given dreams of a future with her masseuse career. And so she kind of sees her life now correcting. Before, she didn't know what she was going to do, right? She didn't know how she would go to veterinarian school. She didn't even really try and get, I think she got her GED, but I think that was only later. So she didn't really have a path towards anything in the future. But now she's like, and even she said that when she has money, then she's going to go back to work and then fulfill her future dreams. But for a lot of these girls, they have now a future. think about like the worst of the worst, right? So the attractive girls who are sort of like born in the worst scenarios, right? Maybe they drop out of high school, they had family who like walked out on them, they were addicted to drugs, they have no life, they have no future, right? But now they're kind of given almost like a second shot at life, and so he's almost seen as her as their like savior, I guess, in a way. And so that kind of makes sense on why they would end up being loyal. And a lot of girls don't get me wrong, they did accuse him of abusing her. Even Virginia herself said that at one point she realized Epstein, he's completely narcissistic and he doesn't care about her at all. He doesn't care about her well-being. And that's one of the reasons that she decided to leave. But a lot of the girls, I imagine, would also not want to say anything. I think apparently 2 of the girls that Virginia referred said that they didn't say that they were trafficked anywhere. And I think that it could, maybe they weren't, right? Maybe they're telling the truth, but it could also be that they wouldn't say the truth that they were trafficked. It could be because they felt like Epstein actually helped them, like they sort of develop a little bit of a attachment to Epstein, right? I think this could be one of the psychological sort of mechanisms that's going on. So this is the psychological makeup of the girls. Besides that, Epstein also used particular manipulation tactics to ensnare them and then to keep them inside and maintain commitment. And so one of the techniques that Epstein uses for girls time and time again is the foot in the door effect. And we can see that when Ghislaine recruited Virginia, she noticed that Virginia was reading a book on how to be a masseuse, because at that point, Virginia wanted to study to be a masseuse. When she saw her reading the book, she said, "Oh, I have a client who's looking for a masseuse, and maybe you can come by, and he's very powerful. He could build your career as a masseuse." And so she's like, "Okay, I guess that's really nice of her that I'm going to, she's offering to help me out," because she thinks that that Maxwell is just being kind. So Virginia goes over to Epstein, and then she finds out that he's naked without a towel on top, I guess. And then and this is sort of like normalized for her because Maxwell acts like there's nothing wrong with what's happening. And so she's like, okay, I guess, it's just one incremental step. And then she massages him. And then Epstein flips over and he reveals, that he's sexually aroused. And then Virginia, that's kind of one step forward, right? So she was just using a regular massage and now he's like showing off in front of her. Later, Maxwell says that, let's, and then they proceed to have sex with him. I'm going to spare you the details. But basically, after they have sex, right? Epstein pays her, I think it was like $200. So it was or $500 or something. It was like a week's worth of wages. That's whatever she was making for 1 week of working, I think full time, I guess, or part time. And then he said, "Oh, you can come back later." After she came back later, because remember we talked about that she already did it before, she doesn't see it as a very big taboo. And so now he said, after she comes back a few times, he says, "Oh, you can come travel with me and I'll pay you even more. And then I'll fulfill your masseuse dreams." And, and then she also has all the other psychological elements that we discussed. And so at each of these points, there's a very incremental step up. And so at no point does somebody want to kind of back out and say, "Oh, I was actually wrong," and they have to go home and tell their their parents or whatever that they're living with, at everyone that they told about this awesome job opportunity, that it was actually, somebody used me. They don't want to kind of backtrack and now look a little bit like a fool. And so they're like, it's just a little bit, I'll just push through. If Epstein from the beginning told them, "Hey, do you want to come travel with me?" whatever, they would obviously say no. And so this is the technique he uses, foot in the door effect. And there was a very famous experiment by Cialdini. He asked some participants to put up a huge sign on their lawn, and most of the people said, "No way." Then he asked some participants, "Hey, could you put up a little sticker in your window? It's very small and it's going to be really helpful for us," right? And once they put up that sticker, then 2 weeks later, he asked them, "Hey, can you put up this big sign?" And a lot more people said, "Yes, we'll put up the sign." And that's because people want to be consistent. People don't want for other people to see them as sort of hypocritical or inconsistent. And they also don't want to say, that they were wrong. It's a little step up. And that's the psychological technique that Epstein uses, and actually a lot of cults do as well. And besides that, there's also a concept of cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance involves the concept where when you're seeing yourself do something, but your opinions on that are something else. So for example, the most common example is that you're seeing yourself smoking, but you don't want to be. So how would you reconcile these behaviors? Because you're smoking because you're addicted, right? But you might not actually realize that because you think that you're in control. And so you have to rationalize to yourself, why am I smoking? And so one of the things that you can rationalize to yourself is, hey, I'm doing this because smoking is actually not that unhealthy. So you're making your thoughts and your actions consistent, right? Because you know that you would never do something that's actually unhealthy. And so one of the things that for the girls is that when they're seeing themselves sort of do this behavior, he's escalating it one step to the next. It could be that they're actually afraid for their safety to run away, right? But it's a little bit subconscious. They don't have time to kind of process and dig into their thoughts like they're in therapy. So they might feel unsafe, so that their subconscious drives them to do something to stay there, right? Because if they run away, they might know too much. And basically now when they see themselves going through that thing, they might say, oh, I actually did it because I must have liked it. So it's a little bit of a self-defense mechanism going on to make their thoughts consistent with their actions, even though they did their actions because of something else. One of the key studies here is by Fessinger, and they asked participants to play a very boring game.
Each subject's assignment to turn each of the wooden pegs a quarter turn to the right, then to start over and turn them again and again and again until the experimenter tells him to stop. It is the most boring and fatiguing task we could devise.
And when they played this very boring game, after they asked them, hey, could you recommend this game to someone else? And they would pay them $1 or $20. And this was like a lot of money back then, right? Because it's a bit of an old study. And when they asked participants to do that, afterwards, they asked participants, hey, how much do you actually like the game? And interestingly enough, people who got paid very little to have to sell the game to somebody else, they actually liked that game more than people who got paid a lot. Because when you pay somebody a lot to endorse your game, which is very boring, right? People thought, okay, I'm only recommending this game because I'm getting paid. But people who weren't getting paid, they said, well, why am I recommending this game? The truth is that they were forced to, so they felt uncomfortable saying no. But that's a subconscious process. They don't realize that. And so when they have to rationalize their behavior, hey, I was really trying to sell this game to somebody else, like I was trying to convince somebody to play the game, themselves, they thought that they were doing that because they actually really did enjoy the game. And this was a very famous study.
Turned them for a while, and it was a lot of fun. It was sort of interesting, I guess.
Really? Well, that's strange, because a friend of mine took the experiment last week. I think it was the same experiment, and he said it was pretty miserable, and that I should do everything I could to get out of it.
Well, I think maybe your friend was wrong. Perhaps it was a different experiment, because this was a lot of fun.
And so something similar that could be happening here is also with the girls too, where they're seeing themselves do certain actions, and then for example, sex, right? Because they're feeling comfortable leaving, and then at one point they say, oh, hey, I must be the kind of person who does that, and then they're like, okay, sure, because I'm the kind of person who does that, I'll come back and do this regularly. Another technique that Virginia outlines is that when they first recruited these girls, Ghislaine Maxwell was actually very experienced in this, and she would begin to tailor her messages towards the values of the girls that she was trying to recruit. And so there's actually an interesting study about tailoring messaging, where in general, when people try to go door to door and, for example, change people's opinions on abortion, this is one experiment, and they found that the amount of people whose opinion they changed is very low. But when they tailored the message to a particular value, right? So they talked to them for a little bit, they fished out some of their values, and then they were instructed to give a certain message that would be in accordance with those values. It was actually found that was actually persuasive. And so Ghislaine Maxwell sort of uses this technique where she personalizes her recruitment tactic towards fitting the values of the participant, and that is more persuasive than just applying a flat-out message that is itself also persuasive, but it will not be as persuasive as tailoring a very particular message to the particular girls. And it doesn't have to be like they have to know all their research, all of their Google history or all of their Facebook history. You just have to talk to them a little bit, learn about their values, and then tailor it to fit in within those values. Besides that, Epstein used a lot of geographical isolation, right? So when he brought the girls over to his island, or he traveled with them all over the world, all over Europe, all over Asia, he geographically isolated them. And this had the important effect. This is actually very popular in cults, right? So for example, the Jonestown cult, where he brings them over. I think NXIVM had the same thing. They bring people to different areas. And so what's important about this is that if something goes wrong, right, when you go back home, do you guys ever have this experience where you're talking at school, so the teacher did this, and then your parent goes like, oh, that's totally unacceptable, or somebody did this at school. And at school, it's normalized, right? Because you don't have any counter-argumentation there. But when you go home, you have somebody else who has their own opinion. And so when you're on the island, if something happens, if they go home, and this was earlier, this was like before kind of like cell phones were a big thing, right? It was like 1980s and 2000s. that you wouldn't have, and it's also true now because you wouldn't speak it to people. Like if, for example, in the morning you get up for breakfast, you would speak to your roommates, right, or the people you live with. You just wouldn't speak to them as often or as deeply if you had to use your cell phone. But they would provide their own opinions, and they would sort of ground you. So the cult cannot kind of whisk your mind away. And so when Epstein does something wrong or something terrible happens, nobody will provide kind of a counter argument. Oh, this is terrible to you because remember, you're geographically isolated. And this also being geographically isolated further, I don't know if Epstein realizes this, but it further exacerbates their resources because now they're dependent on him, right? Definitely for money, for safety, but they're also dependent on him for, again, need for belonging because they don't have any friends that they're talking to outside of the ones that Epstein provides them with. And when they go home, they might find that, after 3 years, which is what Virginia spent with Epstein, that was relatively long though, compared to the other girls, that, I don't have any friends waiting for me at home, right? Because I just spent 3 years not right away from home. So they have a need for belonging, right? A need for self-esteem, a need for meaning, which is all what Epstein provides, right? Because if they go home, they find that, hey, I don't actually have any, any advancements in my job, etc. And I'm 3 years older. So this further exacerbates their need for Epstein psychologically. Something else that's really important is that this molds their identity. And so self-identity theory holds that we form self-concepts. So we have to understand who we are. Who am I? I'm a YouTuber, right? I'm a small YouTuber, maybe. I'm somebody who loves psychology. I'm somebody who, is a son, right? I might be a father in the future. So I have very particular identities socially and also personally. I'm someone who likes to draw, for example. These are all sort of identities that I hold on to. And we're always driven towards having a way to identify ourselves. And we can form identities in two major ways. So the first major way is called self-perception theory. And this is the way that we see what we do, and then we derive that this is who we are, right? So we see that I cook a lot, so I must be a cook. I do a lot of YouTube, so I must be a YouTuber, right? Another theory is called the looking glass self. And this is like we identify ourselves as what others see us. So for example, imagine everyone thinks that we're really smart. Well, typically, if everybody thinks that, that must mean that we're probably pretty smart, right? Because if a lot of people make that decision, then it's probably accurate because when you compile results, people actually tend to be accurate. And so think about these girls, right? So they're taken away, they're geographically isolated, and they have to form an identity, or they have to have an identity. So if they like to draw, they might not have drawing supplies there. If they like to take care of animals, they might not have animals to take care of there. That was Virginia's case. So their identity is slowly taken away, and they have to form a new identity. And so they would form a new identity by observing what they are doing. So they're engaging in an active process. And also, how do other people see them? Well, everybody only sees them as sex objects, right? So they form their identity of themselves that, hey, I'm somebody who does this I'm somebody who's just an object. And so when they might have imagined, hey, at first, right, because he said he's going to give them a career and a job, or a career and money and marry them off. That's what he said at first. And they might say, I'm just going to make some money and then I'm going to go home and do my own stuff. Once they're there, their identity becomes entrenched on, this is who I am, right? This is what I do. So they just see themselves as sex workers. The last psychological factor that I want to get into here, as you can probably tell, there's a lot, but I'm just going to get into one last one. And here it's particularly love bombing. And this kind of ties back to the need for self-esteem. So he would present them with a lot of compliments that would heighten their self-esteem. And this is important because remember, they had a low self-esteem. So if we think about, again, Virginia, right? She doesn't have a job. She doesn't have any sort of future. She dropped out of high school. Nobody is looking up to Virginia. But here, Epstein, let's take a passage from her memoir. Epstein continued to cast himself as my mentor. Sometimes we'd sit in his steam shower for hours as he held forth on topics I'd never heard of before. Game theory, say, or evolutionary biology, financial derivatives, or the mathematical underpinnings of human language. He also gave me books to read. Many of them were sexual in nature, such as Nabokov's Lolita and Anne Desclos's Story of O. But his insistence that I read them still felt like a vote of confidence. Frequently, Epstein told me something I needed to hear, that I was smart and full of potential. And so as we talked about earlier, where nobody is looking up to Virginia, now she has, this man who's very smart, who's well connected with a bunch of scientists, right? He's connected, for example, with psychologists. He's connected with a lot of cognitive psychologists like Noam Chomsky, Pinker. In his interview, he cites Nagel. So he's very connected into the cognitive psychology space, right? These are very great thinkers, by the way. And so it kind of seems like, hey, this guy's really smart and he thinks that I'm really smart. And this makes her feel really respected and really important. And this is different towards, what used to happen. We're at home, she's abused by her dad. Nobody is looking up to Virginia. And so all of these factors are what makes girls stay. And hopefully I answered that question through a lens of psychology, and hopefully you learned something today. And I'm also going to be, again, making other videos about, again, the psychology of beauty, and then also the psychology of, I actually made this video really huge, and I ended up splitting it into 3 different videos. It was supposed to be 1 video, but it just kept growing and growing. Then now it's 3 different videos. And I'm going to be posting future videos about the psychology of Epstein, and then also one about the psychology of Epstein's accomplices, and also the public reaction to the Epstein files. Anyways, and so thank you very much for watching. Yeah, we're at 16 subscribers now. Very exciting, which is a huge growth from 2 subscribers. I think 2 was my last one. So again, thank you very much. And hopefully, and maybe you'd be interested in watching this next video. Thank you.